And welcome to a special edition of Firefighting in Canada, the podcast, as part of the 2024 Virtual Summit. And joining me today is my friend, colleague, and co-contributor to the column Volunteer Vision, none other than Fire Chief Vince McKenzie from Grand Falls, Windsor, Newfoundland, and Labrador. Welcome. It's nice to have you on the program as we go coast to coast. How are you?
Good day, Tom. It's really good to be here. It's good to see you again. Happy New Year to you.
I think it's I think it's amazing when we chat and we don't realize that you and I have been doing this in terms of working with the magazine and contributing and talking about volunteer firefighting for more than 10 years. I guess it's been you've been writing for a while, just a little bit before me, weren't you?
I think it was 2010 was my first column that appeared in Firefighting in Canada. Yeah, and you and I have been colleagues writing the column now for 12, 13 years for sure. I've lost count.
I think, and we may assume and assume wrong that most people know who we are, know who you are, and know who I am. Some do, some don't. But the Volunteer Fire Service across Canada is a very large organization. Tell us about your start. I mean, I started in 1983 in the fire service. I think you're the same, are you?
Same year. We both started the same year, 1983, some 41 years ago. Yeah, I started as a volunteer in my own hometown, and I'm still in my own hometown, only now I am the career chief of a volunteer department.
Tell me about your department and the makeup of the Grand Falls Windsor Fire Department. How many career staff? I mean, you're the only one, are you? And how many paid on calls or volunteers? What's the makeup?
So currently, the town of Grand Falls, Windsor is in the center of the island of Newfoundland and Labrador. We were a former paper mill town, of course, but our paper mill closed back in 2010. And of course, the town survived that. But we are like a central hub in Newfoundland, in the island. Trans-Canada Highway goes through us, and we have like a major hospital here, a lot of government services, a lot of we're a town. We're only 14,000, but we have a lot of city infrastructure where we are a service hub, basically for maybe 100-kilometer radius for sure, and some of the smaller communities in Newfoundland and Labrador. So the fire department is a volunteer fire department, or considered a composite department, I guess, even though we have no career firefighting staff other than myself. But I have a career fire prevention officer, fire inspector, working full-time as well. I work full-time, of course, as the fire chief. And our fire station is manned by a firefighter, but they act as a dispatcher, so they're paid staff. So the fire station has one person in the fire station, acts as the dispatcher when there's a fire. They do not leave. They dispatch the call, open the doors for the volunteers, and respond. We do about 150 to 200 calls a year. We don't do any primary medical response, although we do assist our ambulance departments, in patient lists and stuff. But most of our fires are fire calls, and we're responsible as well for 100 kilometers of the Trans-Canada Highway for vehicle rescue. So that is basically the crux of the makeup of our department.
So you had a mill at one point, and I mean that must have been a bit of a risk when it was around, was it? What kind of risks what kind of risks would you face there?
So it was a paper mill, of course, a newsprint paper mill in operation for over 100 years. They had their own industrial fire department. So the only time that we assisted was when the fires were actually very serious. And we did have some very serious fires in the mill over my career for sure. Yeah, the mill was there. It was like any industrial plant, of course, it was a large risk. I also have a lot of we're a transportation hub. So I have a lot of warehousing for, major grocery distributors, also, the transport companies. And I have 7 personal care homes here as well, and a major hospital, that services the entire central Newfoundland region. So I'm a really small town with a lot of city infrastructure. So comes with that is the city risks, of course. But the call volume, of course, is that of a population of 15,000 people.
Would you be able to, and you look back over 40 years, Would you be able to come up with one or two big changes in your fire department that stand out, that kind of made a difference over time?
Well, I think over my career certainly has been the training standards. Our training, when I joined the fire department, you were given a pager your first night. You get your rubber boots and your coat and your helmet and say, show up at the next call. Well, as you know, in today's world, you just can't do that from a safety perspective, but also the training requirements and the knowledge that is required of any firefighter nowadays. We've, in 92, I think we've adopted 1001 as a training standard here in the province, and our department had grasped that. So then also certification came out. So incidentally, I was one of the very first IFSAC certified firefighters in Canada. I was on the very first class because Newfoundland was the very first province to get accreditation through the International Fire Service Accreditation Congress way back in 1991. So it was an honor to see that, but even that was so primitive at the time.
We have been, you and I, both proponents of the fire associations, and I think that you would agree that getting involved in associations for fire certainly did wonders for the fire department and for you personally. I mean, it all started probably for you as a provincial association, or an area maybe even smaller than that. Where did it begin?
So I was 8 years into my volunteer career, of course, as a volunteer firefighter, but I also was one of those dispatchers that worked full time in the fire station from early in my life as well. So I basically worked in the fire station my entire life. But I got involved provincially in the early 90s. I ran for, to be a local director or whatever for our association here, the Newfoundland Labrador Association of Fire Services. And, I ended up spending almost 23 years on that board in different positions, right up to provincial president for 7, I think it was 8 terms actually. And I only left then when I was elected to the national board of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs in 2015, and have been involved there as well, and basically stepped down about a year ago or 2 years ago when I was also involved in the Maritime Fire Chiefs Association, but I have since become the president of that organization. So yeah, I will certainly agree that association life is I strongly believe in it, because that's our advocacy. That's the passion that I had, was to be the voice of volunteer firefighters around these board tables, and also to forward the fire service in general, from everything from training standards to support from governments, and of course the changing face of the fire service. And our faces have changed so much over the last 40 years that I can remember, but never more so than I think it has changed in the last 10. And of course, you and I, writing the column Volunteer Vision, we've explored a lot of those changes over the years. And it's fun to go back and read what we said 10 years ago, and some of it really still holds true today. Right?
I think the fire community certainly needs to be reminded that, as you say, your involvement with CAFC at the national level, and I honestly have to say thank you for representing not only the fire service nationally, but the volunteer fire service, keeping that at the forefront. Which honestly, it can get lost if you don't remind people that that the volunteer service belongs at the political level, if you will, to promote and talk about. And I mean, that's what you guys have done. It's probably been a challenge, I would think, at some times to carry that torch.
And I totally agree. It's easy to get lost in our career services with our big cities, and you know, most of the population, the people in Canada, are served by career fire departments, but most of the landmass of the rest of Canada, outside of major municipalities, is served by volunteer fire departments, our composite departments. And I've always argued that a fire burns no differently in Grand Falls, Windsor than it does in Toronto. It still requires the same level of expertise, the same level of skill. The only challenge, of course, with volunteer or composite departments is usually we're doing it with a lot less resources in equipment, in money, in the funding, in the personnel, and even in some respects the training levels. So I think one of my passions has been to increase the training levels of volunteers to just that, being a professional volunteer where the training is the same. But I totally agree. I think it's easy to get lost. I've been in the room where the big cities have been there, and they speak for some issues that really affect volunteers, but in a way that is just not totally understood. And any volunteer firefighter watching this will know you almost got to be there in a volunteer department to understand the amount of dedication, the amount of commitment, basically the 24-hour on call, always on, carrying a pager I've carried a pager for 40 years of my life in the municipality boundaries here. And you just never turn it off and say, no, I'm not going to go. You hear a siren, you're going to participate, right? So it's sometimes a little hard for our career members to understand that when we're off shift, we're never really off shift. And so it's been a passion of mine to make sure that is understood. It's also been a passion of mine to make sure our government representatives understand that. And in a province like my own, where a lot of rural fire departments are, we've got over 300 in Newfoundland, Labrador, and probably only about 4 that are career or big-time composite departments. The volunteer fire service is the crux of the entire fire service of our province outside of the large cities.
You were like me, and you got the pager on the first night 40 years ago, where they 41 years ago said, here you go, show up at the, if you and gear, well, maybe try and find some. There's a bunch on the truck. So when did you see the change, especially in your province, not necessarily your community, but in your province? When did you notice that the volunteer fire service changed and improved?
I noticed a change, I would say early 90s, 1991, 92, when our provincial fire commissioner shared that passion. Fred Hollett was his name. Shared that passion about firefighter training and the support of, they kind of understood what it meant to be a volunteer. And I really seen a big shift there. So, hats off to his administration because there was a lot of movement towards that. And of course, that office has continued with that. But also, I think it got driven by the actual volunteers themselves. The thirst and the hunger for the knowledge and the passion to train and the sense of accomplishment was a lot there. It was really there. But I think it was also somewhat generational. So I don't want to say the word work ethic, but it was different back then. Everybody was when you did a job, you wanted to do it right. You wanted to do it a lot, and you took the time to actually train for the position. So I see that change somewhat, but you know what? I think it's all coming full circle again now. So I see this 30 years ago, the fire service really shifted up, then it kind of leveled off. And now I see in the last 4 or 5 years, everybody wants to boost it again. And I'm really excited about that. Actually, I've seen some excellent work by my colleagues on all the associations, provincial, the National Association, my colleagues with the Maritime Fire Chiefs Association. It's a great thing to get in a room with a bunch of people who have a shared interest around a board table. And I could just sit there for hours and listen and also contribute to the ideas. And there are some pretty smart people in those rooms.
Talk more about the generational gap, the generational change that's taken place in the fire service. You have done presentations before on dealing with the gen whatever letter you want to pick, and you say it's come full circle. But what were the challenges of dealing with that generation, if you will, the newer generation coming up, and some of the things that you learned over the years?
Well, Tom, I think there's always been a challenge in the generations, and starting with my own. I remember when I came in as a young firefighter, full of energy and wanting to do things, and I'm sure I drove my senior members and chiefs crazy at the time because you come in with a certain amount of passion. But we see that over the generations, And I don't like using labels, and I don't like, because there's always those exceptions to the labels that, some of our members don't fit that bill. It's all about personalities as well, so I'll justify it there. But, we got caught up in the thoughts around a generational gap, and it was because of technologies. Technologies back when you and I were in high school, no such thing as a cell phone. You were lucky if you were allowed to take a calculator to school with you. Computers changed the game, of course, as well. In the 90s when we started going from, and you remember as well, the film strip trainings and the pinwheels, but then we moved up to video was a big deal. Now, of course, online training is a big thing, but you still got to remember that training is a lot of hands-on. Firefighting is a lot of hands-on. It's a lot of muscle memory of feeling things and holding onto the hoses and of raising the ladders and those kind of things. So the generations have not did so well in some of those practical skills because, let's face it, you're used to doing it on a computer screen. Where I do find the success is in the computer screen, the knowledge that our younger generation has. They read a lot and they see a lot of the videos and a lot of the media that's there for them to learn with, and they're blessed that way. So there's always those trade-offs, but the generations, I feel good about the new generations that are coming in. I've got my own department here. I've got some young new generation kids, and to be honest with you, they've impressed me. They, the expectations were a little lower because of the generation before that, I suppose. But it's great. The other insight that I always had is back in 1987, we started a youth firefighter training program. And I happened to be the person who brought that into fruition. I worked on that project as a recruitment project, as a fire prevention program that turned into a recruitment project. But we've had our youth firefighter program now for over 30 years and graduated like 1,400 kids through this program. Almost half of my department now are graduates from that program. But what it did for us as the fire department was we were able to see the generational shift coming a couple of years earlier all the time, because we were hanging out with these high school kids and having them into the fire station. So really started to see it then. And, of course, we all had our opinions, but at the end of the day, if you have a passion for firefighting, you have a passion for firefighting, and you just get to express it through different technologies or different means.
You said we all have opinions, and I'd like to get your opinion on why people joined the fire service back then, and then you talk about the youth of today, why they're joining it now. I think that's changed.
People say it changed. I somewhat say yes to that, but in some respects, I say it stays the same too, because when you actually join a fire department, you join it for yourself because you got to have the passion or the desire to help the community. And well, I found that even some of my motivations of why I did things, when I first joined the fire department, I joined the fire department because I watched my dad answer the call since 1962 as well. So I literally grew up in the fire station as a kid. And it was all that wanting to be like my father, I guess, but seeing the community involvement. Then when I joined the department, it became a part of a personal quest to learn as much as I could. And of course, I wanted to be the best firefighter that I could be. So you become very passionate about that. And you don't realize that when you do apply yourself to almost every day to a profession, you kind of become that profession in a way. And I think that's where I gravitated then towards the association work, where I had an understanding of the deeper sense of the fire service world. And then I started to see the political side of things. And like we always say, there's politics and everything, and there is. But then allowing myself to learn that world and move to the leadership of the department as well. When I was 20 years in before I became the fire chief, and there were a lot of lessons in leadership that I had to learn starting off as well. And now I look back on it, and you can almost just talk about it in a very matter-of-fact way. But it can be very challenging, especially for our new leaders coming in. And I've, in some respects, I think leadership is something that not a lot of people aspire to be. And sometimes if you do, you can be doing it for the wrong reasons then too, right? So, which is it's a whole new podcast in itself.
You often hear, and we often, there's buzzwords in the fire service, and one of them is recruitment. Is that still a thing? Are we still recruiting people? Because to me, recruitment means I'm out there trying to entice people. I'm trying to sell people on the fire service, whereas I should be dealing with people that are applying, people that want to be in, and me dealing with applicants. Is it still the right word to be recruiting?
My thoughts on recruitment has always been you've got to have an organization that the public respects and that people want to join. And I've used this adage for years that nobody jumps aboard a sinking ship. So if your department is proactive and is out in the public doing the best they can, quality people doing quality work, recruitment of that, the public sees that, and you will attract people. The only problem with that is in order to do that, I think we see that firefighting requires a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of sacrifice. And people, even those people who want to join the fire department, sit back and say, I really don't know if I have the time to commit. And I don't want to bring the organization down by coming in and only giving it half of what is probably required. But so, the shift I see now is that people still want to join the department, but they also are aware of the family work life balance, of which I didn't do a very good job of. And most of us from our generations, it was that way. There were a lot of sacrifices that people accepted, and our spouses and our family accepted. But I think now with the awareness around mental health and positive mental health and work-life balance, people look at firefighting as a major commitment in small communities. And I think that's going to be a challenge for volunteer departments because we're lacking the incentive to pay people to do the work. One thing I always said about a volunteer, they're there because they want to be there. And when they don't want to be there anymore, they leave. And in a way, that's been good for our for our departments. Because there's always freshness, but when it becomes a career sometimes, and you're longing for retirement so you can get your pension, that can really drag down some organizations too. So, and I've seen it across the board. Not to say that that's what happens, but I've seen it happen in some instances.
Is it an issue in, say, your community or other communities in Newfoundland where you have a lot of the recruits or volunteers that are striving for a career in fire, and this is just a stepping stone, and they want to be? I mean, you don't have a lot of career opportunities in Newfoundland. I would think there's a few large centers.
No, I guess our department has never been that way. We were the big department in our area, and normally when we recruited firefighters, they already came working a profession in some respect or another. But yeah, stepping stone, and people used to complain to me or other fire chiefs saying, you're only using this as a stepping stone to get to a larger department. And my answer to that has always been, and I think I wrote it in the column, it's better to train them and have them leave than to not train them and have them stay. And you've heard me say that before as well. But when you do provide good training program to your members, that motivates them as well. I will say, in all honesty, probably since COVID and departments that are, go through that generational change, because I've always said every 20 years is almost like a new guard changes or whatever. My department right now, we're going to be going through that. I think, I'm not at a full strength right now. We are recruiting again. We don't have the waiting list of applicants like we used to. We do have to, get people joining, and the numbers are less. But the quality of what walks through our door is much better. Very high educated people. They, they're very socially aware. They're more intelligent, I think, from a learning perspective on media. The biggest challenge, of course, I think, is the physical part of the muscle memory thing that I talk about. Is actually doing the skills and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I still am very happy. Feel very positive about the fire service, because what we used to have in numbers one time, now we have less numbers but higher quality, and I've seen that recently over the last couple of years as well, especially with the new group of recruits that our department has. They've certainly opened my eyes to put a smile on my face when I see them coming to work as well.
I think that's one of the biggest things is the farm team idea that I've used before in my columns and talked about, that we were always afraid of overtraining them. That was the attitude back then, was, oh, don't teach them too much because they'll go work for a career fire department. Now we're proud of that. Now we train to that level, and we want you to go and have the career departments, the same ones that we're surrounded by, honestly, in British Columbia, that are coming to and recognizing that we are training our people, that they want them. So that's kind of a feather in our cap, if you will. Speaking to that recruitment side, and we talk about the other buzzword, retention. I mean, whether we have to keep people, again, try to keep people. I don't know that people are staying in the fire service, at least in departments or volunteer departments, as long as they used to. I mean, I've written, and I don't know what you think of this, have we seen the end of the long service medals for all these people that people are not going to be putting in those 25 years anymore?
That's a hard one, because there's the cases. I've always said, if you join a fire department and you stay for 5 years, most likely you're going to stay for 20. I find that in the first 5 years is when a volunteer kind of figures out if this is the right fit for them, and the department figures out if that person is the right fit for the department as well. But anybody who would stay 5 years or more, usually what drives them out of the department then is either family life, new kids, more complex family life, or a work situation. But and I've had firefighters that, will again do those sacrifices and make the family sacrifices in order to stay in the department. So talk about the generations, then that's probably where the generational thing fits a little bit more. But retention of firefighters, I always say there's 3 things that motivates firefighters, and the 3 T's I always call it. And the first one was technology. So new fire trucks show up, and everybody wants to be on the new fire truck and train with the new equipment, but that lasts 6 months. The second thing that motivates, of course, is tragedy. You have a major loss in your community or whatever, and people want to join and help, and that usually lasts 6 months. Lasts 6 months as well. But I always said the third thing that motivates firefighters is training. And the more training you provide for them, and the better training, and they keep getting motivated, they build their skills, they become thirsty for it, and they get upset when there's no training. That's when you know your department is successful, because training is everything that we do. So that's the motivation. So when it comes to retention, my biggest thing is to keep training them, keep challenging people, and they will stay if they can. Most of my people who have left, after 5 years, before 20, have been for reasons of either job related, and in their letters they always say, hey, it's a wonderful organization. It really hurts me to have to step down, but I know I just don't have the time, or my job is going to consume too much of my time, and it makes it too complicated for family.
Another Tom DeSorcy meme is leave them wanting more, and
Exactly.
that's what you have to do. I want to talk, and I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on, again, talking about recruitment, retention, and all the things that go with volunteering and being in part of the volunteer fire service, and how important the census, the national census, was that you were involved in with the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, and what that brought, I guess, what level of credibility that brought to the political national level.
Yeah, I'm especially proud of that and the group that I worked with in the Answer to the Call committee. It was a committee formed by the CAFC to deal specifically with volunteer composite issues on that aspect of our industry or whatever. So I got the privilege of chairing the Answer to Call committee, and the excellent people that we had on that board. Like I said, you're at a board meeting, you're talking to some smart people. So we started talking about, when we go to government relations and what Canada's fire service needs federally. And one of the first things our group came up with is, hey, you know what? First thing we need is accurate numbers. We need accurate snapshot of what the fire service looks like across Canada. So that's where the Great Canadian Volunteer Firefighter Census was born. That was the first year. So we said, hey, you know what? We're going to do the legwork. We're going to ask departments to these bunch of questions. CAFC agreed to compile it. We did that, and we got some really good success with it, but we also noticed that we don't have the composite and career side as well. So that morphed then into the Great Firefighter Census for the last 2 years, which we asked the entire fire service to participate. And we, again, got some really accurate numbers, some really disturbing numbers, I suppose, from our perspective. NFPA did a survey or a census or a study in 2015 saying there were 156,000 volunteer firefighters in Canada. But our census, when we did it, the first one I think was in 2020, it was down to like 126. There were 30,000 firefighters less in those 5-6 years. So then over the last 2 or 3 years, we did the same thing, and our numbers stayed consistent. So that kind of shows the validity of our numbers as well. We still don't have there's always more departments that can participate. And this year's census, I'll certainly plug every volunteer fire department in Canada should go for that census and put their numbers in, so we really have a really accurate number. But it's important to remember that out of the 10,000, for example, volunteer firefighters that left the fire service last year, 9,000 came back. So our number kind of stayed at the 120, whatever the number was. I don't like quoting numbers because I don't have it in front of me right now. But out of those 9,000, roughly the same amount came back. But the big thing we did find is those 9,800 firefighters that left took over 102,000 years of experience with them. So even though they were replaced with new people, of course, learning, fire service again. That was kind of eye-opening that we have that kind of experience leaving. So, but again, I still think the volunteer fire service is relatively healthy, but we certainly need more federal support. We had to look no further than the wildfires in BC and the wildfires all across the country that now the municipal fire departments, especially volunteer fire departments, because we are the ones on the urban interface, don't forget. We're the ones surrounded by woods. Every community in Canada that is served by a volunteer fire department is usually out in the woods somewhere. So the urban interface is something that we've got to really do some more work towards. And again, speaking back to volunteers, when I volunteered for the fire department, I didn't want to do campaign firefighting. I didn't sign up to go away for 3 weeks and be on a fire for 3 weeks. So our municipal fire departments, of course, get tasked when there is a wildfire in their community, and we'll go for 2 or 3 or 4 days or whatever, and we'll give everything we can. But usually it's our employers then to say, hold on now, you can't be away from your job for 3 weeks. Some employers can do that. So I see a shift now that fire service will also need some federal support. I don't know what that looks like yet. I've heard some suggestions, but CAFC is working hard now to make sure our elected officials know and our government departments know that the urban interface, climate change emergencies, is not just wildfire, it's also the floods, and climate change emergencies are real. And our volunteer fire services in our communities are the first responder. They are the community's army starting off for the first 3 and 4 and 5 days and weeks. So, we certainly need more federal support. So I really like how CAFC and all the good people around that board and the NAC and the National Advisory Council work together, because it brings the representative from the provinces. And we really got, again, going back to the census, we've got a clear view of what the fire service looks like in Canada. And all the old cliches sometimes get thrown out the window, and some of them stand true. So it's important that we have that data. So I would certainly encourage every volunteer fire department watching this to participate in this year's census, and give us the armament that we need to make the fire service better in Canada.
You've touched on it, and I want to sort of lean toward the close of this about the future of the fire service and that crystal ball that we think we've got sitting on our desk all the time, where we think we can see what's it's going to be like. And you just touched on it, the climate change emergencies, that fires are starting to become less and less actual burning materials versus the calls that we go on. BC, we are a deployment province, and that's what we train to. We are trained by the province to respond to wildfire in terms of being part of a team and a deployment team. So it's different here in British Columbia, but again, responding to calls, responding to floods, responding to community service is it's changing, and I don't think it's going to lessen in the years. What do you think? What's your crystal ball?
I've learned over 40 years that crystal balls never really pan out sometimes. But if I was to share my insight as it stands today, I think that Canada is a big country. We have a lot of different aspects, and I speak in terms of where the volunteer fire service is, or just the fire service in general, but I'll speak to volunteer and composite departments because that's what I'm familiar with, is that, we're going to see more and more of a community's reliance on its emergency services. And we don't go further now to the healthcare crisis now, and fire departments being taxed with more medical response and everything because, of the challenges there. So my crystal ball is that the fire service is going to have to change. The way that we operate, the system of maybe 30 or 40 years ago when it was developed, probably won't work as much anymore. I think that we're going to need to have more collaboration between the provinces and the federal government as a more holistic approach to emergency response. But keeping in mind that a forest fire in Newfoundland and Labrador is different than a forest fire in BC. It burns differently. It burns, we have hurricanes on the East Coast. They have tornadoes on the prairies, and, all those different aspects of emergency management across Canada is important. Fire chiefs and fire departments have to take an interest in emergency management even more, because in a volunteer department, usually the fire chief is the emergency manager. There is no emergency management department. And Tom, you and I know that, in depth, and we certainly sometimes feel inadequate that that's the way it is. But it's the reality. So my crystal ball is the future is going to be challenging. I think that the fire services will always step up to the challenges, but it will look different than it was 20, 30 years ago. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I've got a little bit more longer left in my career, hopefully, to pursue some of those challenges, but knowing full well that I may be retired by the time some of those challenges come into effect, or changes, I should say.
I appreciate you doing this today. It's been a pleasure, and we'll continue for the next 30 years of writing and telling stories, because there's always one or two to tell.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is that you always say, if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. But we can't get bogged down in the fact that change is afoot as well. And some of us that have been around a little while can share some insights, and hopefully help shape the future. But the ball will be certainly passed over to the new generation of firefighters. That the 120,000 volunteers that there now, there's some really good people there, a lot of good training, and they're in a better position than we were 40 years ago now to bring us through the next 40 years.
My friend, awesome. Stay safe, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.